This is Professor Hazera, and this is the second of the 5 videos on the computing ratios for Apple for their 2024 financial statements. Okay, in the first ratio, and what I'm saying, in the first video, we covered all the inputs, which are right here, and we went over all the places where you get them, which are basically described right here. In this video, we're going to cover liquidity ratios. Now, there's 4 ratios in this group. You've probably seen this in some other class, your basic accounting classes. Current ratio, the asset test ratio, which is also called the quick ratio. Though, when you hear those two names, they're referring to the same ratio. Then we've got accounts receivable turnover, and we've got the inventory turnover. Okay, now what we're defining liquidity here. Basically, liquidity means you have a lot of cash or near cash assets. You're very liquid. But in this case, the definition is very close to that. We also consider liabilities. Here, these ratios measure the ability of a company to pay its short-term debts that are due within 1 year. And that makes sense because current assets, for many current assets are either cash or items like accounts receivable or short-term investments, which be converted to cash within 1 year. So they're near cash assets. And current liabilities are basically liabilities that you got to pay off within 1 year. So it makes sense that this ratio here is your sort of your benchmark ratio of your ability to have enough assets to pay off current liabilities within 1 year. So it's assets that can be converted to cash within a year or maybe converted cash. Some current assets can't even do that, so that's why we're going to have the next ratio. But you basically have near cash assets on top and asset liabilities that you have to pay off within 1 year on the bottom. Okay, so our current assets, these are very easy. Current assets, you'll always get total current assets on any balance sheet. They will give you current assets. There it is right there. So on the balance sheet here, so that they have total current assets of 152,987. Now that's 152 $987 million, $153 billion, basically. Remember, you got to add 6 zeros to these for Apple. And then we're going to put that all over. So those are basically your sum or most of your cash or near cash assets, although we're going to have to pull some out for the quick ratio. Okay, now your total current liabilities is right there, 176, 392. Okay, so we will just put that at the bottom. That will be our denominator for the current ratio, 176,392. So we get a ratio of 153 billion, more or less, divided by 176 billion. So we get a current ratio of 87, more or less. Now I'm going to go ahead and take these two, and they're dollars. And I'm just going to go ahead and format them with a 0, take the zeros off, and put the currency right there. And the ratio, there's 1 or 2 ways to interpret this ratio. I'm going to use the dollar approach to interpreting this ratio. I like that approach because it's very monetary. Okay, so, and I'm going to put that out to 3 cents, more or less, 3 decimal places, more or less. Okay, so what this ratio means is that Apple has, it means that for every $1 of current liabilities due within 1 year, for every $1 of current liabilities, Apple has about 87 cents that's 87 cents to pay off that $1. Okay, so if Apple owes $1 here, if they owe $1, it means that they have 87 cents to pay out that $1. Now, if you're just looking at this just as one number, it doesn't look very good because basically what it's saying is that Apple doesn't have enough cash or near cash assets to pay off that $1 in liabilities. Now, that's actually not true. You're going to see that Apple has a lot of non-current items like long-term investments that they could easily convert to current assets or convert to cash. and pay off liabilities, but they just don't intend to sell those investments and pay off liability, short-term liabilities. So it's not a concern of mine. But generally speaking, a couple of things. You want this ratio, the current ratio is better if it is higher. That's the first generalization. Generalizations aren't always true, but generally speaking, you want this ratio to be as high as possible because you want a company to have as much ability to pay off short-term liabilities as possible, and a current ratio should be at least 1. But in this case, and what we're saying here is that it would be nice if you owe $1, you have $1 to pay it off. You only have 87 cents. But for Apple, that's just not true because Apple has a lot of non-current liabilities like investments in stocks and bonds that it doesn't intend to sell, and it generates more than enough cash to pay off its short-term investments. Now, I mean, I don't think anybody worried about Apple's ability to pay off their its current liabilities. Okay, the next ratio is very similar to the current ratio. And this ratio also measures Apple's ability to pay off its short-term liabilities. Okay. However, and that's why we have the same numerator. You're measuring your ability to pay off liabilities that are due within 1 year, and so we're going to use the same denominator there. Excuse me, denominator. 176,392. We're saying, does Apple have enough assets to pay those off? Now, the numerator here is somewhat similar to the numerator in the current ratio, current assets, but we're not going to take all current assets. We're going to take out only the most liquid current assets, which, by the way, are also called quick assets. Cash, accounts receivable, and marketable securities. They're usually the 3 top lines on the balance sheet, and we call those quick assets because they're either cash or assets, accounts receivable, marketable securities, that can be very quickly converted to cash. You collect an receivable, it becomes cash. You have a marketable security, it's marketable, so that means you can sell it right away and it becomes cash. So these are the most liquid assets there are. So basically, it's the same ratio. It's very close to the current ratio, but in this case, you're seeing if the company has enough very liquid assets to pay off your current liabilities. In that sense, more conservative. Okay, so the top is going to be made up of the first 3 lines on the income statement. So we're going to go, I'm just going to add them up as we go along here. So we're going to go over here. What am I saying? The balance sheet. Balance sheet. Sorry about that. Okay, so we're going to have an income statement. Okay, here. So first one is cash, which is your most liquid asset, obviously, plus marketable securities, which is your very liquid. It's probably more liquid than accounts receivable. And then finally, we're going to have accounts receivable here. So basically, these are the most liquid assets on your balance sheet. Now, you may want to include vendor non-trade receivables. I would hesitate because I really don't know. Accounts receivable is usually trade receivables. You know you're going to collect the receivables that you have that are due in the course of your regular business, and those are predictable. I don't know what non-trade receivables are, so maybe they belong there, but maybe they don't. I'm going to leave them out of the calculation because I just don't know if they're as liquid as their accounts receivable. I don't know what they mean by non-trade. Or they may not be in the regular course of business. I don't know. But anyway, so I'm going to include cash, marketable securities, and accounts receivable. And the total of those is 98,581. And so the first ratio, current ratio, assumes that you're going to be able to pay off your current liabilities with all your current assets. This one, the quick ratio, only assumes that you will pay off your liquid liabilities, your short-term liabilities with the most liquid current assets. Okay, so here I'm going to go ahead and do the usual formatting here. Okay, and let's see what ratio you get. 58 cents, and the quick ratio, this makes sense because the quick ratio is they only include some. The denominator is the same, but the numerator is different. So we leave out many of the current assets in the quick ratio. So obviously the ratio is going to be less. And so this is telling you that for every $1 of current liabilities, Apple has, how much is that? That's about 56 cents, more or less, 56 cents. 56 cents of near liquid assets, of very liquid assets to pay off. Should be $1. Okay, and the major difference between these two ratios is not the denominator, it's the numerator. Okay, and so this one has all current assets. This one has the most liquid current assets. Okay, and um, just like the current ratio, the quick ratio is better if it is higher. And so I'm going to go ahead and just copy this down. You can use the same generalization, but I'm going to change the word current to quick ratio. And so the quick ratio is better if it's higher, obviously. And it would be nice if the quick ratio were at least 1, although many times it's lower than that because the numerator is much lower. Okay, now one item that we should really look at is the differences in these two, in the numerators of these two ratios right here, because the denominator is the same. You're asking yourself, can we pay off that 176,392 in current liabilities? Okay, and for the current ratio, you use all your current assets. For this, the quick ratio, you use only some of your current assets, okay, which are the most liquid ones. But what are we leaving out? What assets are we leaving out of the quick ratio? And this is usually the case, but usually the major asset that you're leaving out is inventory. So notice, let's go back and look at this. For the current ratio, we took the sum of all these items right here, and we left out inventories. Now, inventories is not that big here. Here, the major difference is these vendor non-trade receivables. I still think that we should exclude them because I just don't know what they are. If I knew more about the company and I knew that they were receivables that you would collect very quickly, I'd probably include them. I just don't know at this point. So that could change in the future. But inventories, generally speaking, is the major asset that you leave out of here. And so for most companies, inventories are actually higher, much higher as a percentage of assets than that. Apple manages inventories very well because it has a lot of productions done in China. But but the major difference is that we'll put here that, just as a side note, that for the quick ratio, it is assumed that the company will not pay off current liabilities by selling inventory. And there's two reasons for this. The first reason is that inventory is just not that liquid. Inventory, for some industries, it's very liquid. For others, it takes a long time. It takes several days to sell your inventory. So it's not as liquid as an account receivable. It's certainly not as liquid as a marketable security that you can sell tomorrow. And the other reason is that if you assume that a company is going to use its inventory to pay off its current liabilities, that usually means that the company is not a going concern. Just think of small stores that are going out of business. What do they do with all their assets? Well, they pay off their current liability, and they're going out of business. So Basically, those are the two reasons. One is the inventory might not be that liquid, and the other one is that if you assume that a business will liquidate all its inventory, well, it's called liquidation sale means you go out of business. So, but we have to assume in accounting the going concern assumption that the company will continue. Okay, now the next two ratios sort of get into the speed with which assets are being converted up the chain here from just under cash, let's say accounts receivable right there, and inventories right there. How fast these assets are being converted, either in the case of accounts receivable, how fast they're being converted to cash, because you can have a balance sheet with a lot of accounts receivable that they're not being converted to cash. And that does you no good. Non-collectible receivables are worthless. By definition, they're not collectible. So you have to be collecting those in order for those receivables to be liquid. And the other one is everybody wants to know whether or not you're selling your inventory. If you're not selling your inventory and converting that either to a receivable on a credit sale or cash on a cash sale, then you could be in trouble. So these two basically measure how fast you're taking receivables and converting them to cash, and inventories and converting them to receivables and then to cash. So we'll see. We're assuming credit sales on that one. Okay, so let's go back to the ratios here. Okay, so let's start accounts receivable turnover. Okay, this measures how fast you're collecting your accounts receivable turnover, measures how fast you are collecting your accounts receivable. Okay, and so on the top side, you're going to have credit sales. Now, by definition, that means that it only includes sales, not that you sell things. That only includes things that you sell on credit that flows through receivables. However, it's kind of practice with some people that they just take total sales and assume they're credit sales, and we'll make that simplifying assumption. So we're just going to take total sales here from the top of the income statement and assume they're all on credit. Now, that may or may not be true, but to get the credit sales, we could probably figure it out by working backwards through the T accounts. I don't have the time for that. We don't have the time for that this summer. So we're just going to go ahead and assume that all their sales are credit sales. Okay, so we have here currency. We'll still leave it with 0. Once there, now average on the bottom. So these are sales that you assume are going to flow through accounts receivable. On the bottom, you have your average accounts receivable balance. So these are the sales that flow through this basically, and your average accounts receivable balance. When I use the word average in these videos, it's always going to be a 2-year average. You're going to take your beginning of your balance, your end of your balance, and divide by 2. Okay, so let's see how this is calculated here. So we're going to go to the balance sheet over here. And on the balance sheet, I'm keeping, now I'm not using the non-trade receivables because they may not even be for sales of inventory. I want to use the trade accounts receivable, which means that they're probably for sales of inventory. Okay, so we have 29,508 is our beginning, plus we're going to take the ending accounts receivable of 33,410, and we're going to divide by 2. Okay, so our average accounts receivable balance is 31,459. Okay, and our ratio is 39051 divided by 31. So, and that's not bad. I'm going to go ahead. Now, this is not going to be a dollar label here. So let's go ahead and just take this down. We'll take it out 3 decimal points. This means that Apple collected its accounts receivable. Its average accounts receivable balance uh, 12.43 times this year. Okay, and is that good or bad? I don't know. You'd have to look both at the Apple's history over the last, let's say, 10 years. Has this good? The trend going up or down? Do you want this ratio to be higher? And you'd also compare it to competitors like Microsoft. Although probably Samsung is closer to Apple, but Microsoft is a good American competitor. I didn't want to use international. Okay, and so this is probably a good ratio. Um, I think so. So you can compute this, and you've probably seen this before, but you can also compute this ratio in terms of the days that are required for Apple um, to collect its accounts receivable here. So let's just take 365 days in a year and divide by the accounts receivable turnover, accounts receivable ART, accounts receivable turnover, which is equal to that number there, and we'll divide the number of days times the times collected here. And we get, it should be just under a month, or just a little bit, just over a month, about 28 days or something like that. So 365 divided by 12.43. So what this says is that Apple collected its accounts receivable every 29 days, which is about a month, which really isn't that bad. I don't have any benchmarks. We're going to use benchmarks here. But it would seem to be reasonable. And of course, you want this ratio to be higher. Accounts receivable turnover is better if it is higher, which means you're collecting your receivables more rapidly. You want to be collecting those receivables as fast as possible. And the faster you collect your receivables, the lower this number of days becomes. You want this number of days. Days should be lower. You want to collect your receivables as fast as possible. A receivable that is not being collected is basically worthless. All it is a promise. Okay, now the final ratio in these is inventory turnover. And obviously, this is a key ratio because without selling your inventory, you're out of business. This measures how fast you're selling your inventory. Okay, now the numerator for this ratio is cost of goods sold. Remember, the cost of goods sold comes from your income statement. So we'll just go over here and we'll get our cost of sales here. There it is, 210,352 is your cost of goods sold. So we'll format that. So there's your cost of goods sold, 210,352. And I want to make sure to get these labeled correctly. And then your average inventory is equal to the average inventory, just like I took for accounts receivable. It's going to be your beginning plus ending divided by 2. This is pretty small inventory here for a company that does so much business. We'll divide that by 2. Should be 6808.5. That looks pretty good. Okay, so we're going to format that again. We'll go down, take it up to 9. That's okay. Okay, and so the ratio is 30 30 times. So I'm going to label this times. And I want to label by this way. I did in a sense. There it is, 12.3 times. I labeled the first one ratio times, but I'm going to explicitly label this one times. They're both should be measured called times, which means that in this case, Apple sold its inventory 31 times this year. Okay, so let's go ahead and take that out to make it 3 decimal places. We'll it's not. Okay, we'll take it out. About 31 times. Okay, which is pretty good. I mean, that's they sell their inventory pretty fast here. So, and you want the company to sell its inventory as fast as possible. So Apple sold its average inventory balance about, let's just say, 31 times this year. You want this number to be higher, the better. So inventory turnover is better if it is higher. And just like the accounts receivable turnover, you can compute this in terms of days. Let's go ahead and just finish here with that. So if we take 365 days and divide that by the inventory turnover, which is which is equal to about 31. That means that Apple sold its inventory about every 12 days, and days should be lower. The lower the faster that you sell your inventory, the better. Inventory hanging around costs you a lot of money, and sometimes so there it is right there. And that looks pretty good. So Apple looks to be in pretty good shape. I don't have any benchmarks, but you look at these for Apple over time and then you compare it with other companies too. Probably for Apple, you compare it with Samsung would be a good comparison, but Apple's also in the software business. So Microsoft is a direct competitor. One last thing is inventory turnover is such an important number because for a company like Apple, which is innovative, if they don't sell their inventory, if this ratio drops, and I've seen this happen before, if this ratio drops all of a sudden, that could mean because Apple is based on innovation, its products are becoming obsolete. And that's what everybody worries about Apple is it has to keep that iPhone technology and marketing up, or it could become technologically obsolete, or it could become obsolete from a marketing perspective too. People may not like the brand anymore. So this is a very important ratio for Apple to maintain. Because it's a measure of obsolescence for its products. And Apple survives by its innovation and the ability to maintain innovative products. Obsolescence is like really bad for Apple. Anyway, so those are the current, those are the liquidity ratios. Next time the next ratio just covers the leverage ratios, and I'll just sort of telegraph you a little bit. That's just there's going to be two ratios in there. Okay, so the main difference here is that liquidity ratios measure your ability to cover your short-term debts, the current ratio with all your current assets, the asset test ratio only with your most liquid assets. And then, of course, you've got to know that you're turning your accounts receivable into cash because you can't pay off debt with accounts receivable. You got to cover it to cash. And the kind of same holds true for inventory. If you don't sell your inventory, come cash or accounts receivable then convert to cash. So anyway, so be sure to understand that the first two ratios are coverage ratios. These first two are can you cover your current liabilities, and these next two are current ratios. It's are you converting your non-cash current assets quickly into cash? Okay, they're non-cash right current assets into cash. Anyway, and finally, these leverage ratios, they're going to be the same thing, but they measure your ability to pay off your long-term debt. So that'll be the video. Okay, I hope everybody enjoys your weekend. I'm signing off.